Every element has its contrast. This is something we saw when we looked at the rule of space. When we used space around an area that had detail, it enhanced that area. Detail and space are two elements that exist in contrast, yet they require each other. If you want to balance an image, then you must balance a high amount of detail with a high amount of space. If one is too dominant, then the composition might become unbalanced. Balance is something that can be elusive because your first thought might be that a canvas should be 50% detail and 50% space. This would be logical and it would create perfect balance. However, that isn't always desirable. This is an image of somebody meditating. The figure is simplistic and there are areas that have a low amount of detail, but outside the body is a massive amount of detail. If I had made the entire image very detailed, it would have become unbalanced. However, this image still isn't 50% detail and 50% space. It is clear to see that there is more detail than space. So why didn't I aim for a perfect amount of balance? Well, this image is titled Restless, and it depicts the early stages of meditation when someone is trying to quiet a busy mind. The image needs to be busy in order to convey that concept. In this image, the person has obtained a sense of calm. You'll notice how this image has far less detail. There is some detail in those loose brush strokes, but it's really kept to a minimum in order to portray a sense of calm. Detail and space are necessary companions, and when you want to balance one, it's important to use the other. If you have a high amount of detail, then you can't keep adding detail in the hope that it will improve the image. You've gone too far, so it becomes time to add space. We've all reached that point when we've become so absorbed in the process of creating a piece of work that we struggle to stop. The process has become so restful and therapeutic that we cease to think about the artwork we're creating. On those occasions, we can end up with an image that has become chaotic and filled with too much information. In these moments, it's necessary to add space. This can be upsetting when we've spent so much time on an image, but it will improve the final image. Sometimes this can mean erasing large areas of work or expanding your canvas. Adding space is a process of removing what is already present, and that can be difficult. I really like this image, but the amount of detail is too high. It is one of those occasions when I became so wrapped up in the process that I ended up with more detail than was desirable. But I still like the image. It has some interesting shapes. It's hard to accept changing it, but these things are necessary if we are to create images that have a higher amount of balance. I needed to accept that this piece of work isn't finished. I didn't want to discard any of the detail that I'd created, so I decided to split that detail across two separate images. This is something that can be achieved with scissors, or it can be done in a computer program such as Adobe Photoshop. I used software, but basically I'm just cutting the image into pieces. I made sure that the shapes were interesting, and then I placed half on one canvas and one half on the other. I could have positioned them in different places, but I was pleased with the direction it was taking. I had added space to the image, and I didn't have to delete any of the details. On other occasions, I've discarded the detail in favour of creating more space, but it isn't always necessary. I flipped the image on the right so that the pieces would have symmetry. I wanted to consider how they would be displayed as a diptych. All of the original detail is still there. I've merely added space. This process reminds me of when we expanded the canvas in one of the earlier videos. In that situation, the image stayed whole, but in this example, it's been cut into pieces. The entire point of this exercise was to add space in order to balance the detail that was already present. This meant that I could add colour, but it wouldn't be a good idea to add further detail because we're trying to create balance and the image doesn't need more detail, it needs space. That detail needs the space in order to breathe. I originally didn't plan on creating two images, but the result has led to an artwork that has greater balance between detail and space. This example is an abstract piece of artwork, and you might be asking yourself if this is possible with images that are more realistic. If the piece contains a human figure, then you wouldn't want to chop up that figure. But there are other parts of the image that you might want to chop up and stretch out. You might have a background that could do with more space. You can chop it up and stretch it out, painting over any areas that have become disjointed. You have to be careful with a process like this. It can be difficult, although it is a good method of adding space without sacrificing too much of the detail.